It begins with a sound, the whisper of wind over water, the hiss of foam on an empty shore. Then, a gathering roar. This is the Atlantic, an ocean that does not sleep. It is a force of nature that has shaped our world in ways we are only beginning to understand. From the icy grip of the north to the sun-scorched tropics of the south, its waters stretch across a third of our planet's surface. It is a world of its own, vast and formidable. For millennia, it was the edge of the known world, a place where maps ended and monsters were said to dwell. Its horizon was a challenge, a question that dared humanity to answer. The Atlantic is an ocean of moods. It can be a mirror of glass, reflecting the calm heavens above. But it can also become a maelstrom of unimaginable power. Waves rise like liquid mountains. Storms gather with a fury that can tear the strongest ships apart. These are the waters that have tested the courage of every mariner who ever dared to cross them. They are a reminder of nature's indifference to human ambition. The sea gives, and the sea takes away. Its surface tells a story of constant change, of light and shadow, of peace and of turmoil. It is a living, breathing entity, its pulse felt in every tide. Before history was written, the Atlantic was there. It has witnessed the rise and fall of ice ages. It has seen continents drift and mountains rise from its floor. Its currents, like great rivers within the ocean, have dictated climates and guided the journey of life itself. These currents are the ocean's circulatory system, carrying warmth from the equator towards the poles and returning cold water to the depths. They are an engine of our planet, influencing weather patterns that affect billions of people. The story of the Atlantic is a story of time itself, measured not in years, but in epochs. Its depths hold the memory of a world much older than our own. Look out upon its expanse. Under the light of the moon, the water turns to silver and black. It is a place of profound beauty and deep mystery. It seems to go on forever. This endlessness has called to us. It has inspired poets and explorers. It has been a source of sustenance and a well of fear. The Atlantic is more than just a body of water separating lands. It is a bridge. It is a barrier. It is a character in the grand drama of human history. Conquest, tragedy, discovery, silence that holds the secrets of ages. This ocean is a living archive. It remembers everything. Every ship that has sailed its surface has left a faint wake, a fleeting signature on the water. Every life lost to its depths has become a part of its eternal silence. The Atlantic does not forget. It holds the echoes of ancient voyages, the whispers of sailors long gone. Imagine a Viking longship, its dragonhead carving a path through the northern mists, its crew guided by sunstone and stars. Their hopes and fears are absorbed by these same waters. The ocean was their pathway to new lands, a fearsome god to be respected and appeased. It was a realm of uncertainty where survival was a daily struggle against the elements. Centuries later, the sails of different empires would catch the same winds. The age of exploration dawned, and the Atlantic became the great highway of nations. Old maps show a world slowly coming into focus, with the ocean at its center. Lines were drawn across its surface, charting currents and trade winds. These were the routes that connected continents, that moved gold, spices, and people across the globe. The ocean became a chessboard for kings and queens. It was the stage upon which the fate of empires was decided. Its control meant power, wealth, and dominance over the known world. But every crossing carried a risk. For every vessel that reached its destination, another was claimed by the sea. The Atlantic became a graveyard. Its floor is littered with the bones of countless ships, from humble fishing boats to mighty warships. These wrecks are more than just twisted metal and rotting wood. They are time capsules. They are monuments to human endeavor and human tragedy. Each one tells a story of a final, desperate battle against the waves, a story of dreams and fortunes swallowed by the abyss. The ocean holds these stories in its cold embrace, preserving them in darkness. The memory of the Atlantic is also written in the lives it has touched. It has been a source of food, a path for migration, a barrier to be overcome. It has shaped cultures on every shore it touches, from the fishing villages of Newfoundland to the vibrant coasts of West Africa and Brazil. Its rhythms have dictated the rhythms of life for millions. The ocean's memory is not just one of ships and empires, but of ordinary people whose destinies were tied to its tides. It is a shared history, a collective memory held within the vast, deep waters that connect us all. For most of human history, the Atlantic was a great divide. It was the vast, impassable ocean sea that separated what we now call the Old World from the New. On one side, continents teemed with established empires, ancient cities, and civilizations that had risen and fallen over thousands of years. Europe, Africa, Asia were woven together by networks of trade, conflict. Their people looked east, towards known lands and familiar horizons. The West was a void, a place of myth and speculation. To sail into the sunset was to sail off the edge of the world, into a realm of the unknown. Then everything changed. Driven by a thirst for new trade routes, for gold, for glory, explorers turned their ships westward. They challenged the ancient fears. They sailed into the vast emptiness, armed with little more than primitive navigation tools and incredible bravery. When they finally made landfall on the other side, two halves of the world collided. It was a moment that would forever alter the course of human history. The Atlantic was no longer a barrier. It had become the ultimate bridge, connecting peoples and ecosystems that had been separated for tens of thousands of years. This connection came at a great cost. The meeting of worlds was not always peaceful. The ocean became a conduit for conquest and exploitation. The transatlantic slave trade, a chapter of profound sorrow, saw millions of people forcibly carried across these waters. Their suffering is an indelible part of the ocean's story. The Atlantic bore witness to immense cruelty, its currents carrying ships laden with human cargo. This dark history is embedded within the ocean's memory, a somber and powerful reminder of the deep scars left by the age of empires. The waves that crash on these shores seem to carry the echoes of that pain. From that point forward, the Atlantic was the heart of a new global system. It was the center of a swirling vortex of goods, ideas, cultures, and diseases. This exchange transformed both sides of the ocean forever. Potatoes and corn from the Americas would change the diet of Europe. Horses and steel from Europe would change the way of life in the Americas. The world shrank. The Atlantic, once a symbol of the infinite and the unknowable, had been tamed. It was charted, mapped, and crossed with increasing regularity, becoming the busiest oceanic highway on the planet. Below the wind-whipped surface, beyond the reach of sunlight, lies another world. This is the deep Atlantic, a realm of crushing pressure, absolute cold, eternal darkness. Down here, time moves differently. 1,000 years can pass like a day. It is a silent, waiting world. Our understanding of this domain is surprisingly recent. For centuries, the abyss was a place of pure imagination. Monstrous krakens, leviathans, sailors staring into the black water at night. It was the ultimate mystery, a place more alien and inaccessible than the surface of the moon. Today, we can finally peer into that darkness. Using sound instead of light, our instruments paint a picture. Sonar pulses travel down through the water column, bouncing off the seabed and returning to us with information. They reveal a landscape as dramatic and varied as any on land. There are vast, flat, abyssal plains that stretch for hundreds of miles, covered in a fine sediment that has rained down from the world above for millions of years. This sediment is a logbook of Earth's history, containing the microscopic skeletons of ancient life, the ash from volcanic eruptions. The sonar also reveals towering mountain ranges, the mid-Atlantic ridge, where new crust is born from the planet's core. And it shows us canyons, some deeper and wider than the Grand Canyon on land. These submerged chasms were carved by powerful underwater currents over eons. It is within these hidden landscapes that so much history lies preserved. The deep ocean is a perfect museum. The lack of oxygen and the intense cold slow down the process of decay almost to a halt. Objects that would have vanished on land can survive for centuries or even millennia in the abyss. Here, in the silent deep, lie the final resting places of countless vessels. The legendary Titanic, its two halves separated by a field of debris, rests over 2 miles down. Digital sonar scan revealing the detailed outline of a large intact shipwreck resting on the ocean floor. Its discovery was a pivotal moment, proving that the deep could preserve our history with haunting clarity. Cannons from 17th century galleons, still standing as if ready to fire, are adorned with corals. Amphorae from Roman trading ships lie in silent clusters. This is the great archive of the Atlantic. It is a place where history does not decay, but sleeps, waiting for the light of discovery to awaken it from its long, dark slumber. Long before the great empires drew their lines across the sea, the Atlantic was a place of local knowledge. Well, it was a provider and a neighbor, not a barrier to be conquered. For coastal communities, from the rocky shores of ancient Europe to the sun-drenched coasts of West Africa, the ocean was a part of life itself. They learned its rhythms intimately, the turning of the tides, the seasonal habits of fish, and the telltale signs of an approaching storm. Their relationship with the water was not one of dominion, but of coexistence. They did not seek to cross the immense void, but to live alongside it, drawing sustenance from its shallows and respecting its powerful depths. These first sailors were not explorers in the way we think of them today. They were fishermen, traders, and migrants moving along the coasts. Their vessels were small and vulnerable, crafted from wood, hide, and reed. A journey of a few dozen miles was a significant undertaking, a venture into a world that could turn hostile in an instant. They hugged the shorelines, using landmarks to guide their way. The open ocean, the vast, featureless expanse of blue, was a place of profound dread. It was the realm of gods and monsters, a liquid desert from which there was no certain return. Their world was defined by the land they could see. Yet, even in these early times, humanity was pushing the boundaries. Islands visible from the mainland were settled, each one a stepping stone into the unknown. This was a slow, cautious expansion, driven by necessity or curiosity. Each successful voyage built upon the knowledge of the last, creating a tapestry of local maritime culture. They learned how different woods behaved in saltwater, how to weave sails that could catch a gentle breeze, and how to read the flight of seabirds to find their way back to land. This was the quiet, unwritten beginning of our long and complex relationship with the Atlantic, a history measured in paddle strokes and cautious glances at the horizon. These early Atlantic people left behind few records of their own. Their stories are told not in books, but in the archaeological remains they left behind. Ancient fish hooks, the remains of coastal settlements, and the designs of their boats, passed down through generations. Their legacy is not one of grand voyages or conquered lands, but of a deep and abiding connection to the sea. They were the true pioneers of the Atlantic, the ones who first learned to listen to its whispers and survive its moods. Their accumulated wisdom formed the foundation upon which all later crossings would be built, a silent testament to human resilience at the edge of the great ocean. The silence of the early Atlantic was eventually broken by a new and formidable sound. It was the rhythmic pull of oars through water, the creak of a single mast, and the determined voices of men singing into the fog. This was the age of the Vikings. From the deep fjords of Scandinavia, a new kind of vessel emerged, perfectly suited to the harsh northern seas. The longship was a masterpiece of naval engineering. It was long, narrow, and light, with a shallow draft that allowed it to travel up rivers just as easily as it could cross open water. It was both a warship, a troop carrier, a vessel of exploration, and of terror. These were the ships that carried the Norsemen out from their homelands and into the wider world. Driven by overpopulation, political unrest, and a thirst for wealth and glory, they began to push westward into the unforgiving North Atlantic. Their voyages were unlike anything that had come before. They were not merely hugging the coastlines. They were making deliberate, audacious leaps across vast stretches of open, storm-tossed ocean. They were venturing far beyond the sight of land, putting their faith in their ships, their seamanship, and their understanding of the natural world. The Atlantic was no longer just a barrier, it was a pathway to destiny. The Norse navigators were masters of their craft. They had no compasses, no sextants, no modern tools to guide them. Instead, they relied on an intimate knowledge of their environment. They watched the sun's position at midday to gauge their latitude. They observed the flight patterns of birds like gannets and guillemots. They followed the migratory paths of whales, the great leviathans of the deep. They may have even used legendary sunstones, crystals that could reveal the sun's position even on a completely overcast day. This period marked a fundamental shift in humanity's perception of the ocean. The Vikings proved that the Atlantic, at least in its northern reaches, could be crossed. They demonstrated that with the right technology, courage, and knowledge, the horizon was not an end, but a beginning. They transformed the sea from a place of absolute dread into a navigable, if still incredibly dangerous, highway. The wakes of their longships carved the first true transatlantic routes into the ocean's memory. Faint lines that stretched from Norway to Iceland to Greenland, and ultimately to the shores of a continent they could not have imagined. The westward push of the Norse was a multi-generational epic, a story of island hopping across the roof of the world. Their first major leap was to Iceland, a volcanic island of fire and ice sitting alone in the middle of the North Atlantic. They settled it in the late 9th century, transforming it from a pristine wilderness into a new hub of Norse society. But for some, Iceland was not the final destination. It was merely a base camp for even more ambitious journeys. From here, explorers like Eric the Red, exiled for manslaughter, set his sights on another rumor of land even further to the west. He would strategically name it Greenland to attract settlers. Greenland was a far harsher environment. A vast sheet of ice covers most of the island, leaving only a narrow, rugged fringe of green along the coast in the summer months. Here, the Norse established small, tenacious communities, farming the thin soil, hunting seals, and hunting walruses to survive. They were living on the very edge of the European world, a tiny outpost of humanity clinging to the side of a frozen continent. Their connection to Europe was tenuous, dependent on a few ships making the perilous journey each year, bringing vital supplies like iron and wood. It was from this isolated perch in Greenland that the final, most remarkable leap was made. Around the year 1000, nearly 500 years before Columbus, a Viking ship commanded by Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, was likely blown off course on a journey from Norway. He and his crew made landfall on a new shore, a land of forests, wild grapes, and flowing rivers. They called it Vinland. Archaeological evidence discovered at Lonceau Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, confirms their presence. Here, we have found the remains of Norse-style turf houses, workshops, and tangible proof of this extraordinary achievement. But the Norse settlement in North America did not last. The distance from their homelands was too great, the supply lines too long and unreliable. They also encountered indigenous peoples, whom they called Skraelings, and their interactions were often hostile. After only a few years, the Vikings abandoned their foothold in the New World. The memory of Vinland faded into the realm of myth, recounted only in the Icelandic sagas. The Atlantic once again became a great divide, but the feat was never forgotten. A seed had been planted, the knowledge that land, not monsters, lay on the other side of the endless water. After the brief and remarkable Norse voyages, a long silence fell over the Atlantic. For nearly 500 years, the connection between the two sides of the world was severed. The memory of Vinland became a whispered legend, a half-believed story told around firesides in the far north. In the rest of Europe, the Atlantic remained the ocean of darkness. Maps continued to depict a world that ended abruptly at the shores of Portugal and Ireland. The sea beyond was a void, a place where the laws of nature were suspended. Cartographers, with little information to go on, filled these empty spaces with their fears, drawing terrifying sea serpents and monstrous creatures rising from the depths to devour ships. This was a worldview shaped by theology and tradition as much as by geography. Europe, Asia, and North Africa. To venture beyond its established boundaries was not only physically dangerous, but ideologically suspect. It was seen as an act of hubris, a challenge to the established order of things. The ocean was God's barrier, a divine warning against straying too far. The prevailing currents and winds of the North Atlantic also conspired to keep sailors close to home, often pushing them back towards the European coast. During this period, maritime technology in much of Europe had also stagnated. The ships that plied the Mediterranean and the coastal waters of the Atlantic were not built for long-haul, open-ocean voyages. Cogs, galleys. They were often clumsy, difficult to sail against the wind, and unable to carry enough provisions. Without the right ships and navigational knowledge, a westward crossing seemed suicidal. So the Atlantic waited, vast, untraversed, mysterious. On one side, great empires rose and fell. The Silk Road connected Europe to the riches of the East. Great cities bustled with trade and intellectual ferment. In the Americas, the Aztec, Maya, and Inca civilizations flourished. Two separate streams of human history flowed in parallel, divided by the immense and silent ocean. The world was held in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the technology, the will, and the courage to finally and irrevocably bridge the gap. The impetus to conquer the Atlantic would not come from the cold, foggy north, but from the sun-drenched coast of the Iberian Peninsula. In the 15th century, the small kingdom of Portugal, perched on the southwestern edge of Europe, began to look to the sea for its future. Locked out of the lucrative Mediterranean trade routes of Venice and Genoa, and blocked from overland routes to the east by powerful rivals, the Portuguese had one direction to turn: west, into the open ocean, and south, along the unexplored coast of Africa. Their ambition was singular: to find a new sea route to the spice-rich markets of India. This ambition was championed by one man in particular, Prince Henry, who would become known as the Navigator. He was not a sailor himself, but he was a visionary patron of exploration. From his base in Sagres, on the southern tip of Portugal, he gathered the finest map-makers, astronomers, shipbuilders, and mariners. He sponsored a systematic, step-by-step assault on the Atlantic. Each voyage was tasked with pushing just a little further down the African coast than the last. Each journey was a mission to gather information, to map the coastline, to understand the winds and the currents, and to overcome the deep-seated fears of the sea. The primary psychological barrier was a place called Cape Bojador on the coast of modern-day Western Sahara. For generations, this cape had been the non plus ultra, the point of no return for European sailors. Legend said that beyond it, the sea boiled. The sun was so hot it would turn a man's skin black, and monsters waited. It took more than a dozen attempts over many years before one of Henry's captains, Gil Eanes, finally summoned the courage in 1434. He sailed out into the open ocean, away from the coast, to bypass the Cape and its treacherous currents. When he returned safely, the psychological barrier was shattered. This single act of defiance against ancient superstition opened up the floodgates. Portuguese ships began to surge south. Madeira, the Azores, Cape Verde. These islands became crucial stepping stones, laboratories for colonization and agriculture, and vital resupply stations for even longer voyages. The Portuguese were not just sailing, they were learning the secrets of the Atlantic. They discovered the Volta do Mar, the turn of the sea. They learned that to get home from the south, they had to sail far to the west, seemingly in the wrong direction, to catch the westerly winds that would carry them back to Portugal. The Portuguese ambition to chart the unknown would have been impossible without a revolutionary new technology, the caravel. This was a ship unlike any seen before, a vessel born from the unique demands of Atlantic exploration. It was small, light, and remarkably agile, typically weighing just 50 to 60 tons and crewed by about 20 sailors. Its true genius, however, lay in its innovative sail plan. The caravel combined the traditional square sails of northern Europe, which were excellent for running before the wind, with the lateen, or triangular, sails common in the Mediterranean, which allowed a ship to sail much closer to the wind. This combination gave the caravel unprecedented maneuverability. It could take advantage of winds from almost any direction, a crucial ability when exploring unknown coastlines with unpredictable breezes and currents. It could venture into shallow coastal waters and estuaries where larger ships dared not go. Yet it was also seaworthy enough to handle the powerful swells of the open ocean. The caravel was a vessel of discovery, a nimble scout designed to probe the edges of the map and return with priceless information. Life aboard a caravel was incredibly difficult. The crews lived in cramped, squalid conditions, with no shelter from the elements except for a tiny cabin in the stern reserved for the captain. Their diet consisted of hardtack biscuit, salted meat, and wine, a monotonous and unhealthy fare that often led to the dreaded disease of scurvy. They slept on the open deck, exposed to sun, rain, and the constant spray of salt water. They were utterly isolated, specks of wood and canvas in an overwhelming wilderness of water, their lives dependent on the skill of their captain and the strength of their ship's timbers. Yet, despite the hardships, these ships and their crews pushed the boundaries of the known world further and faster than ever before. For decades, caravels were the engines of the Age of Discovery. They carried Bartolomeo Diaz around the Cape of Good Hope. They carried Vasco da Gama all the way to India. And they carried another Genoese-born navigator, Christopher Columbus, on his fateful voyage west. The caravel was the key that unlocked the Atlantic. As sailors spent more time on the open Atlantic, they began to sense that the ocean was not a uniform, static body of water. It had patterns. It had moods. And most importantly, it had currents, great invisible rivers flowing within the sea itself. The most powerful of these is the Gulf Stream. This immense current of warm water originates in the Gulf of Mexico, surges through the Straits of Florida, and then flows northeastward across the Atlantic, carrying the heat of the tropics towards the colder climes of northern Europe. It is a colossal force of nature, moving more water than all the world's rivers combined. Early mariners did not understand the science behind the Gulf Stream, but they certainly felt its effects. A ship sailing from the Caribbean to Europe would find its journey dramatically shortened if it could find and stay within this powerful current. The water within the stream was often warmer and a deeper blue, and it had its own distinct ecosystem of seaweed and marine life. For sailors, catching this river in the ocean was like finding a secret highway. It became a crucial piece of navigational knowledge, a trade secret passed down from one captain to another, giving a vital commercial and military edge to those who knew how to use it. The influence of the Gulf Stream extends far beyond shipping routes. It is a planetary heat engine, a critical component of the Earth's climate system. The warmth it delivers to northwestern Europe gives the region a far milder climate than it would otherwise have. London and Paris, which are at similar latitudes to Calgary in Canada, are spared the brutal winters experienced by their North American counterparts thanks to this river of warm water. The Gulf Stream dictates weather patterns, influences the formation of hurricanes, and creates a unique marine environment that supports a rich diversity of life, from tiny plankton to the great whales that follow its path. This powerful current also played a role in the human story of the Atlantic. It shaped the routes of explorers, traders, and slavers. It dictated the terms of naval engagements, where knowledge of the current could mean the difference between victory and defeat. The Gulf Stream served as both a guide and a gatekeeper. While it offered a swift passage eastward, its powerful flow made the return journey westward, particularly in the lower latitudes, much more challenging. Navigators had to learn to work with this immense natural force, to ride its back when they could, and to respectfully avoid its power when they had to, further deepening their complex relationship with the living ocean. To venture out of sight of land was to enter a different dimension of reality. On the open ocean, all the familiar landmarks vanish. There are no mountains, no trees, no coastlines. There is only the ship, the sky, and the endless, shifting surface of the water. For the mariners of the age of exploration, navigating this void was the single greatest challenge. Their lives and the success of their missions depended on their ability to answer two simple but profound questions. Which way are we going, and where in this vast ocean are we? Their tools were simple, their methods a blend of science and art. Their primary instrument for direction was the magnetic compass, a technology that had slowly made its way to Europe from China. A magnetized needle floating in a bowl of water or pivoted on a pin would faithfully point towards the magnetic North Pole, providing a constant reference point. However, sailors quickly discovered that the compass needle did not always point to true north. This variation, which changed depending on one's location, was a deep and persistent mystery. They had to learn to account for this compass error through careful observation and painstaking record-keeping, a constant process of calibration against the heavens. Determining their position on the featureless sea was an even greater challenge. To find their latitude, their distance north or south of the equator, they looked to the sky. During the day, they could use an instrument like a quadrant or an astrolabe to measure the angle of the sun above the horizon at its highest point, local noon. At night, in the northern hemisphere, they measured the height of Polaris, the North Star. These celestial measurements, when cross-referenced with pre-prepared charts, could give them a reasonably accurate idea of their latitude. It was a tedious and difficult task, especially on the pitching deck of a small ship. The problem of longitude, their east-west position, was far more difficult to solve. It was a puzzle that would vex mariners for centuries. Without an accurate clock that could keep time at sea, determining longitude was largely a matter of guesswork, a process called dead reckoning. A navigator would measure the ship's speed using a log line, note its direction from the compass, and then estimate the distance traveled over time. This method was notoriously inaccurate, as it failed to account for the powerful effects of unknown currents and leeway caused by the wind. Every ship sailing the Atlantic was, to some degree, lost, its true position a matter of informed speculation until the welcome sight of land appeared on the horizon. The ships of the age of exploration did not sail into the Atlantic empty-handed. They carried cannons, they carried navigational tools, and they carried legal and religious ideas. Chief among these was the doctrine of discovery. It took shape as papal bulls and royal edicts. The doctrine said Christian explorers could claim sovereignty over lands not inhabited by other Christians. It effectively declared vast lands and peoples as territory to be taken or converted. This provided moral and legal cover for European colonialism. When Columbus made landfall in the Bahamas in 1492, he acted as an agent of that doctrine. He performed acts of possession, he planted flags, he erected crosses, he claimed the land and its inhabitants for his Spanish patrons, Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. The Taino were treated not as sovereign owners but as subjects to be incorporated. The Atlantic became the conduit for a monumental clash of worldviews. European empires arrived with a sense of divine right. They carried a belief in cultural and religious superiority. They sought gold and territory. Opposing them were hundreds of distinct, ancient cultures tied to the land. The ocean that once separated them became the medium of domination. The doctrine set the stage for centuries of conflict, dispossession, and exploitation. The Atlantic was transformed into a political arena to be carved up. Spain and Portugal moved to divide the newly discovered world. In 1494, they signed the Treaty of Tordesillas, drawing a line down the Atlantic. Lands west of that line were claimed by Spain. Lands east were claimed by Portugal. It was perhaps the most audacious act of map drawing in history. Columbus's voyages did not discover a new world. They created one. His crossing irrevocably stitched together the continents of Europe, Africa, and the Americas into a single interconnected system for the first time in human history. This new reality, which historians call the Atlantic world, was defined by the movement of people, goods, plants, animals, ideas, and diseases across the ocean. The Atlantic was no longer a void separating worlds, but the very heart of a new global network, a dynamic center of exchange and conflict that would shape the modern era more than any other single factor. This vast transfer of life between the old and new worlds is known as the Columbian Exchange. It was a biological revolution with profound consequences. From the Americas, Europe received crops that would transform its diet and agriculture: potatoes, maize, tomatoes, and cacao. These new, high-calorie foods helped fuel a population boom in Europe. In return, the Americas received wheat, rice, sugarcane, and a host of domesticated animals: horses, cattle, pigs, and sheep. These introductions completely reshaped the American landscape and the way of life for its indigenous peoples. The horse, in particular, had a revolutionary impact. For the peoples of the Great Plains, it transformed their cultures, enabling them to hunt buffalo with new efficiency and to travel and trade over vast distances. But the exchange was not always beneficial. The most devastating transfer from the Old World to the New was disease. Europeans and Africans brought with them germs to which the indigenous peoples of the Americas had no immunity. Smallpox, measles, influenza, and other plagues swept through the continents with catastrophic speed, causing a demographic collapse of staggering proportions. In many regions, up to 90% of the native population perished. This great dying was an unintentional but horrific consequence of the new connections forged across the ocean. It created a vacuum that European powers were quick to fill, facilitating their conquest and colonization of the two continents. The Atlantic world was thus born in a crucible of both creation and destruction. It was a world of new opportunities, new foods, and new knowledge, but it was also a world built upon a foundation of immense suffering and loss. The ocean itself, indifferent and eternal, served as the silent, ever-present witness to this dramatic and often brutal transformation of the planet. The moment Spain and Portugal claimed the Atlantic and the lands beyond as their own, the ocean became a battleground. The incredible wealth that began to flow eastward from the Americas, silver from Mexico and Peru, gold, pearls, emeralds, inevitably attracted rivals. Other European powers, particularly England, France, and the Netherlands, refused to accept the Iberian monopoly. They saw the riches of the New World as a prize to be fought for. The Atlantic, once a realm of explorers, became a domain of pirates, privateers, and naval fleets. The Spanish treasure fleets became the prime target. These were massive convoys of galleons, heavily armed warships designed to carry treasure, that sailed in formation for protection. Twice a year, they would gather the wealth of the Americas and make the perilous journey back to Spain. Their routes were predictable, and this made them vulnerable. English sea dogs like Sir Francis Drake, operating with the tacit approval of Queen Elizabeth II, became legendary for their daring raids on Spanish ships and colonial ports. To the Spanish, they were nothing more than pirates. To the English, they were heroes, chipping away at the power of their greatest rival. This conflict was not just about gold, it was a clash of empires and religions. Protestant England and the Netherlands were locked in a prolonged struggle with Catholic Spain. Every ship captured, every port sacked, was a blow against the enemy. The line between piracy and state-sponsored warfare, or privateering, was intentionally blurred. A privateer was essentially a licensed pirate, given a letter of marque by their government that authorized them to attack enemy shipping. It was a way for smaller navies to wage a guerrilla war at sea, disrupting trade and draining the enemy's treasury without the cost of a full-scale naval confrontation. The Caribbean Sea, the gateway to the Spanish Main, became the epicenter of this conflict. Its hundreds of islands and hidden coves provided perfect bases for pirates and privateers to lie in wait for the treasure fleets. For over 2 centuries, the region was a chaotic swirl of violence and intrigue. Fortunes were made and lost, and countless lives ended in brutal combat or at the bottom of the sea. The Atlantic was no longer a pristine wilderness. It was now a strategic chessboard, its sea lanes contested, its waters stained by the ambitions and the blood of rival empires locked in a struggle for global supremacy. As the Atlantic became the central artery of global trade and conflict, the need for better maps became paramount. The crude, speculative charts of the early 15th century, decorated with monsters and myths, were no longer sufficient. This was an age that demanded precision. Empires needed to know the exact locations of coastlines, friendly ports, enemy strongholds, depths of channels, and dangerous reefs and shoals. Navigation was a matter of state security and economic prosperity. The act of mapping the ocean became a critical tool of imperial power, a way to claim, control, and exploit the new Atlantic world. A new generation of cartographers emerged in the great maritime centers of Lisbon, Seville, Amsterdam, and London. They were scholars and artisans, gathering information from many sources. They debriefed captains, pilots, and transcribed logbooks. They used astronomical observations and mathematical calculations. Their workshops were hubs of geopolitical intelligence. The maps they produced were highly valuable, treated as state secrets, capable of giving rivals military or commercial advantage. These maps were art and science, compass roses, cartouches, ship drawings, and exotic animal illustrations. But beauty hid purpose, practical instruments of power. Drawing a line on a map, giving a place a name, was possession. European names overlaid indigenous ones, erasing prior inhabitants, reinforcing the colonial claim. Maps placed Europe at the center, the origin point for measuring other lands. Slowly, painstakingly, the void was filled in. Coastlines of the Americas, Africa, and Europe grew more accurate. Winds and currents, the Gulf Stream, the trade winds, were charted for predictable voyages. The ocean was tamed, rationalized, and brought into human knowledge. Mythical creatures gave way to rum lines, depth soundings, and navigational warnings. The Atlantic shifted from terrifying mystery to a knowable, manageable, and profitable expanse of water. The construction of the Atlantic empires was a project of immense scale, and it was fueled by an insatiable demand for labor. The gold and silver mines of Mexico and Peru, the vast sugar plantations of Brazil and the Caribbean. Initially, European powers attempted to force the indigenous populations into labor, but their numbers had been decimated by disease and by warfare, and many resisted enslavement. The colonists needed another source of manpower. They turned their eyes across the ocean to the continent of Africa. This decision would, unleash one of the greatest tragedies in human history. The transatlantic slave trade was a brutal and systematic enterprise. Over nearly 4 centuries, more than 12 million African men, more than 12 million African women, and more than 12 million African children were forcibly captured, torn from their homes and families, and packed into the dark, suffocating holds of slave ships. They were treated not as human beings, but as cargo, their value measured in profit margins. The journey across the Atlantic, known as the Middle Passage, was a nightmare of unimaginable suffering. Chained together in cramped spaces with barely enough room to move, they endured filth, disease, and starvation. The mortality rate was horrific. Nearly 2 million people died during the crossing. The Atlantic Ocean became a conveyor belt of human misery. Its currents, which had guided explorers to new lands, now carried ships laden with despair. The profits from this trade were immense. They fueled the economic development of Europe and the Americas. Sugar, tobacco, and cotton, produced by enslaved labor, enriched nations, built cities, and funded industries. This wealth, however, was built on a foundation of profound cruelty. The very fabric of the Atlantic world was woven with the threads of exploitation. The ocean bore silent witness to countless acts of violence and desperation, its depths becoming the final resting place for those thrown overboard. This dark chapter is an inseparable part of the Atlantic story. The ocean that connected continents also became a vast, watery grave, a symbol of the brutal inequalities that defined the age of empires. The legacy of this trade is still felt today in the cultural landscapes of the Americas, in diasporic communities around the world, and in persistent racial inequalities. The silent deep of the Atlantic holds the memory of this immense sorrow, a somber, powerful reminder of the terrible price that was paid for the building of empires. While the focus of the Atlantic crossings often falls on the movement of people and goods, there was another, equally transformative migration taking place. A vast array of unseen passengers made the journey across the ocean, hidden in the ballast of ships, clinging to hulls, or mixed in with agricultural cargo. These were the plants, animals, insects, and microorganisms that hitched a ride from one continent to another, arriving unannounced and often with devastating consequences. This biological invasion permanently altered the ecosystems on both sides of the Atlantic, in ways that are still unfolding today. From Europe, ships brought invasive species like the brown rat, which swarmed ashore in ports and quickly spread, wreaking havoc on local wildlife, especially ground-nesting birds on islands that had no native predators. European weeds arrived as seeds mixed in with grain and livestock feed, outcompeting native plants and transforming meadows and forests. Earthworms, which had been wiped out in the northern parts of North America by the last ice age, were reintroduced, changing the very structure and composition of the forest floor. These were quiet invasions, happening underfoot and out of sight, but their impact was profound. The traffic also flowed in the other direction. American insects were transported to Europe, sometimes with disastrous results. The Phylloxera aphid, a tiny insect that feeds on the roots of grapevines, was accidentally introduced to France in the 1860s. It spread rapidly through the country's vineyards, devastating the French wine industry and causing an economic crisis. It was an agricultural catastrophe that required a desperate transatlantic effort to solve, eventually by grafting European vines onto resistant American rootstock. It was a stark reminder that the connections of the Atlantic world could be a double-edged sword. These unseen passengers highlight a fundamental truth about the Atlantic crossings. No connection is without consequence. The ocean became a conduit not just for human ambition, but for the complex and unpredictable forces of biology. Every ship that crossed the water was its own miniature floating ecosystem, carrying a sample of life from one world and introducing it into another. This great, unplanned experiment in ecology reshaped the planet. The world we live in today, with its particular mix of plants and animals, is a direct result of these countless, invisible journeys that took place in the wake of the great empires. As empires solidified and trade routes matured, the Atlantic entered a new era. The 18th and 19th centuries became the golden age of sail. The ocean was no longer a place of terrifying discovery, but a vast commercial highway, crisscrossed by thousands of ships. Majestic clipper ship with all sails unfurled, cutting through the water. The vessels themselves evolved into magnificent expressions of power and grace. Towering masts scraped the sky, acres of white canvas sails designed to catch every breath of wind. These were the clipper ships, the East Indiamen, the great frigates of the line. They were the culmination of centuries of shipbuilding knowledge, masterpieces of wood, rope, and wind. They were the engines of a truly global economy. The rhythm of life on these ships was dictated by the wind. A good, strong breeze meant a swift passage and healthy profits. Days or even weeks of calm, known as the doldrums, meant idleness, dwindling supplies, and mounting frustration. The captain was an absolute monarch on his wooden island. His word was law. The crew was a diverse, international community of men, bound together by shared hardships and dangers. Their work was physically demanding and relentless, a constant battle to control the immense power of the wind captured in their sails, often in freezing gales or blistering tropical heat. These ships carried every conceivable commodity. From the Americas, they brought cotton, sugar, and tobacco. From Europe, they carried manufactured goods, textiles, and tools. The Atlantic was the great conveyor belt of the Industrial Revolution, supplying raw materials and distributing finished products worldwide. The wealth generated was staggering, but it flowed primarily in one direction. It concentrated in imperial centers, building fortunes and financing expansion, often perpetuating dependency and exploitation. This era represents the peak of humanity's partnership with the wind. To witness a fleet of these tall ships on the horizon was to see a spectacle of profound beauty and human ingenuity. Success depended on an intimate understanding of the ocean's moods, currents, and the fickle nature of its winds. But this golden age was destined to be brief. A new sound was beginning to echo across the water, the hiss of steam and the churning of paddle wheels. A new power was coming, one that would not depend on the whims of the wind, and it would change the face of the Atlantic forever. During the golden age of sail, another more brutal industry flourished on the open Atlantic. This was the age of whaling. For centuries, whales had been hunted close to shore, but now, with larger and more capable ships, the hunt moved into the deep ocean. The prize was the whale's blubber, which could be rendered down into high-quality oil. This oil lit the lamps of cities, lubricated the machines of the Industrial Revolution, and was used to make soap and paint. The whale was a floating treasure chest, and the Atlantic was a vast hunting ground, its waters home to sperm whales, right whales, and humpbacks. The whaling ship was a factory at sea, a vessel designed for a grim and bloody business. High in the rigging, a lookout would scan the horizon for hours, searching for the telltale spout of a whale. When one was sighted, the cry of "Thar she blows" would galvanize the ship into action. Small, fast whaleboats were lowered, each crewed by 6 men, armed with harpoons and lances. They would row silently towards the immense creature, a leviathan that could weigh more than 40 tons. The work was incredibly dangerous. A flick of a whale's tail could smash a boat to splinters, sending the men into the frigid, shark-infested water. The hunt itself was a brutal, terrifying affair. The harpooner would strike first, sinking a barbed iron deep into the whale's flesh. The whale, shocked and in pain, would often dive deep or race across the surface, towing the small boat on a Nantucket sleigh ride at terrifying speeds. The struggle could last for hours, a desperate battle between man and beast. Eventually, the exhausted whale would surface, and the crew would move in for the kill. using long lances to pierce its heart or lungs. The sea for acres around would turn red, a stark and terrible stain upon the blue water. Once the whale was dead, the real work began. The immense carcass was towed back to the ship and tied alongside. Using sharp flensing spades, the crew would peel off the thick layer of blubber in great strips. On deck, the blubber was chopped up and boiled down in huge iron pots, the try-works, which filled the air with a thick, acrid smoke that could be seen for miles. The oil was stored in barrels below deck. This industry pushed whale populations to the brink of collapse. The Atlantic, which had once teemed with these magnificent creatures, saw their numbers plummet. It was a trade built on slaughter, another chapter in the story of the ocean as a source of ruthless extraction. For all the romance of the Age of Sail, the Atlantic never lost its capacity for sudden, terrifying violence. The ocean remained the ultimate arbiter of fate. A ship that set sail on a calm sea could, within hours, find itself in a fight for its life. Hurricanes, born in the warm waters off the coast of Africa, would sweep across the main shipping lanes, generating winds of unimaginable force and waves the size of buildings. In the North Atlantic, winter storms, nor'easters, could appear with shocking speed, their howling winds and freezing spray encasing ships in tons of ice, weighing them down until they foundered. Caught in such a storm, a sailing ship was almost helpless. The primary goal was survival. The crew would scramble aloft into the treacherous, swaying rigging to furl the sails, a desperate and dangerous task. A single misstep could send a man plunging into the raging sea below, from which there was no rescue. If the sails were not taken in quickly enough, the sheer force of the wind could rip them to shreds or snap the massive wooden masts like matchsticks. A dismasted ship was a crippled thing, left to be tossed about at the mercy of the waves. Below decks, the world became a chaotic nightmare of sound and motion. The ship would groan and shudder as every timber was strained to its breaking point. Water would pour in through the deck planking and any unsealed hatches. The crew, exhausted and terrified, would man the pumps in a ceaseless, back-breaking effort. The roar of the wind and the crashing of the waves was a deafening, constant assault on the senses. In the darkness of the hold, surrounded by shifting cargo, men could only pray and wait, listening to the agonizing sounds of their vessel being torn apart around them. For thousands of ships, it was a battle they did not win. The Atlantic is a vast graveyard, its floor littered with the wrecks of vessels that succumbed to its fury. They lie in the darkness, their names and stories largely forgotten, their final moments known only to the storm that took them. These wrecks are stark monuments to the unforgiving power of the ocean. They are reminders that for all our ingenuity, for all our mastery of wind and wood, the Atlantic always had the final say. It was a constant, humbling lesson in the face of nature's overwhelming might. Sometimes the tragedy was not of a storm, but of a profound and unsettling mystery. Of all the strange tales the Atlantic has to tell, few are as haunting as that of the Mary Celeste. In December of 1872, the British brigantine Dei Gratia was sailing in the middle of the Atlantic, about halfway between the Azores and Portugal. Its crew spotted another ship, a two-masted brigantine, drifting erratically. It was sailing under partial sail, its movements clumsy and uncontrolled, as if no one was at the helm. As they drew closer, they identified the vessel. It was the Mary Celeste, which had left New York for Genoa nearly a month earlier. The captain of the Dei Gratia hailed the ship, but there was no reply. An eerie silence hung over the vessel. A boarding party was sent over to investigate. What they found was deeply disturbing. The ship was in perfectly seaworthy condition. Its cargo of industrial alcohol was intact. The crew's personal belongings were untouched in their quarters. Money, valuables. There was a 6-month supply of food and fresh water on board. The ship's logbook was found in the mate's cabin, with the last entry made 10 days prior, noting the ship's position just off the Azores. But of the crew, Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, his 2-year-old daughter, and 7 crewmen, there was no sign. The evidence on board only deepened the mystery. The ship's only lifeboat was missing, suggesting the crew had abandoned ship in an orderly fashion. Yet, why would an experienced captain order his crew and family into a small, open boat in the middle of the Atlantic when their ship was perfectly sound? Some clues were perplexing. A single pump was found disassembled, as if for repair. There was water sloshing in the bottom of the hold, about 3.5 feet deep, but this was not considered a catastrophic amount. A sounding rod, used to measure water in the hold, was found abandoned on deck. The ship's chronometer was gone. The ship's sextant was gone. Over the years, countless theories have been proposed to explain the disappearance. Was it a pirate attack? Unlikely, as the valuable cargo and personal effects were left behind. A mutiny? There was no evidence of violence. Some have suggested a waterspout, a seaquake, a sudden, violent disturbance that panicked the crew into abandoning ship. Another popular theory involves the cargo itself. The 1,701 barrels of alcohol may have been leaking flammable vapor, and fearing an imminent explosion, the captain might have ordered a temporary evacuation into the lifeboat, only to have the tow rope snap, leaving them stranded as their ship sailed away without them. The truth remains lost to the Atlantic. The Atlantic is an ocean of ghosts. Its long history of trade, tragedy, and conflict has left it filled with stories of phantom ships and spectral sailors. Legends born from the fog, from tricks of light on water, and from the profound isolation of life at sea. Sailors, spending months on end in a world of wood, wind, and water, were prone to seeing things. A distant bank of fog could look like the sails of a ship. A flock of seabirds on the horizon could be mistaken for a vessel in distress. The ocean has always been a canvas for the human imagination to project its hopes and fears. The most famous of all ghost ship legends is that of the Flying Dutchman. Though often associated with the Cape of Good Hope, the tale has echoed across all the world's oceans, including the Atlantic. The story tells of a captain who, in a moment of hubris, swore he would round a treacherous cape in a storm, even if it took him until Judgment Day. As punishment for his blasphemy, he and his ghostly crew are doomed to sail the seas forever, never able to make port. To see the Flying Dutchman is considered a terrible omen, a harbinger of disaster for any ship that crosses its path. These tales are more than just simple sea shanties. They reflect the very real anxieties of a sailor's life. The fear of being lost at sea, of being condemned to wander the ocean forever, was a real and present danger in the age of sail. Ghostly lights, known as St. Elmo's fire, a weather phenomenon where plasma creates a glowing discharge on the tips of masts, were seen as either a good or bad omen, a message from the spirit world. Even in the modern age, the ocean retains its power to generate mystery. The story of the Mary Celeste, a real ship found perfectly intact but completely deserted, became a cornerstone of maritime lore, a true story that feels like a ghost story. It speaks to a deep, primal fear, the fear of the unexplained, of a quiet and orderly disappearance that offers no answers. These phantom tales, whether rooted in fact or in folklore, are part of the Atlantic's cultural memory. They are the stories the ocean tells about itself, whispers of the strange, the lost, and the damned. There is a region in the western part of the North Atlantic that has become synonymous with unexplained mystery. It is known as the Bermuda Triangle: Bermuda, Florida, Puerto Rico. This stretch of ocean has, in modern folklore, gained a reputation as a place where ships and aircraft vanish under bizarre circumstances. The legend took root in the mid-20th century, fueled by magazine articles and popular books. The most famous case is the disappearance of Flight 19 in 1945. 5 U.S. Navy Avenger torpedo bombers departed from Fort Lauderdale on a routine training mission. A few hours in, the patrol leader reported they were lost. "My compasses are malfunctioning." He was unsure of his position. Radio contact became garbled and then lost. The 5 planes and 14 airmen were never seen again. A Martin Mariner search plane also vanished, presumed exploded, crew of 13. USS Cyclops, SS Cotopaxi, various private planes and yachts. Theories range from mundane to highly speculative. Magnetic anomalies disrupting compasses, sudden methane releases from the seabed, encounters with UFOs or portals to another dimension. Examined with academic and nautical rigor, the mystery largely evaporates. Coast Guard records and insurance companies do not find an unusually high disappearance rate. Many incidents have logical explanations. The area is prone to sudden violent thunderstorms and hurricanes. The Gulf Stream creates challenging sea conditions. Many stories have been exaggerated over time, crucial details omitted. The Devil's Triangle is less a paranormal hotspot and more a testament to the enduring appeal of a good mystery. Just off the coast of the island of Bimini in the Bahamas, lying in only a few meters of clear turquoise water, is a formation that has sparked decades of debate. It is known as the Bimini Road. Discovered in 1968, it is composed of large, roughly rectangular limestone blocks arranged in a linear pattern that stretches for about half a mile. To some observers, the blocks appear too uniform, too deliberately arranged to be a product of natural geology. They look like paving stones, the remnants of an ancient road, a wall, or a pier. This discovery immediately ignited speculation about its origin. Could this be a man-made structure? A relic from a long-lost civilization? The idea was quickly linked to the most famous legend of a lost city, Atlantis. The psychic Edgar Cayce had, decades earlier, predicted that evidence of Atlantis would be found near Bimini around 1968 or 1969. For believers, the discovery of the Bimini Road was the fulfillment of this prophecy. It was tangible proof of a sophisticated prehistoric culture that had been swallowed by the sea, just as Plato had described in his famous dialogues. Geologists and archaeologists, however, have approached the formation with more caution. The scientific consensus is that the Bimini Road is a natural phenomenon. The rock is beach rock, a type of sedimentary rock that forms in the intertidal zone. The regular, block-like shapes are the result of a process called tectonic fracturing. As the rock formed and was later subjected to stress and weathering, it cracked along straight, predictable lines, creating the pavement-like appearance. The stones, while visually striking, show no tool marks or other definitive evidence of human workmanship. Despite the scientific consensus, the mystery of the Bimini Road endures. It continues to attract divers, researchers, and mystics, all drawn by the tantalizing possibility that it might be something more than just rock. The debate itself highlights a deeper human fascination. We are drawn to the idea of a history that has been lost to the waves, of ancient cities sleeping beneath the sea. The Bimini Road, whether natural or man-made, serves as a powerful symbol of this longing. It is a place where the line between geology and mythology becomes blurred, where we can almost believe that the stones on the seabed have a story to tell. The deep ocean has always been a realm of monsters. Before we had the science to understand its true inhabitants, we populated the abyss with creatures born from our deepest fears. For sailors staring into the black water from the deck of a small ship, the ocean was a place of infinite and terrifying possibilities. Every strange shape in the waves, every large shadow passing beneath the hull, could be a sign of something monstrous. These legends were not just stories. They were attempts to explain a world that was profoundly hostile and unknown. They were a way of giving a name and a face to the dangers of the sea. One of the most enduring of these legends is that of the Kraken. Originating in Scandinavian folklore, the Kraken was said to be a sea monster of colossal size, a creature so large it could be mistaken for an island. It was described as having massive tentacles, capable of wrapping around a ship and dragging it down into the abyss. Sailors feared its power to create giant whirlpools that could swallow a vessel whole. For centuries, the Kraken was one of the most feared creatures in the Atlantic, a symbol of the ocean's destructive power. Today, we know that the legend of the Kraken was likely inspired by a real animal, the giant squid. Growing to lengths of up to 13 meters or more, the giant squid is one of the most elusive and mysterious creatures in the ocean. For centuries, our only evidence of its existence came from carcasses washed ashore, or the sucker-shaped scars found on the skin of sperm whales, their natural predators. It was not until 2004 that a giant squid was photographed alive in its natural deep-sea habitat. The discovery confirmed that a real-life monster, one that had haunted the human imagination for centuries, did indeed lurk in the Atlantic's depths. Other legends tell of great sea serpents, long, serpentine creatures that were reported by sailors and even depicted on old nautical maps. These sightings may have been inspired by real animals, misinterpreted by frightened eyes. A pod of dolphins swimming in a line, a large oarfish, or a mass of floating seaweed. These stories, from the Kraken to the sea serpent, reveal a fundamental truth about our relationship with the ocean. It is a place that invites mystery. Even as science illuminates the depths, the ocean retains its power to make us wonder what else might be down there, still waiting to be discovered. After centuries of exploration, of science, and of discovery, the Atlantic remains a place of profound mystery. We have mapped its surface, charted its currents, and plumbed its deepest trenches. We have uncovered its history, from the voyages of the Vikings to the tragedies of the world wars. We have discovered ecosystems that defy our understanding of life itself. And yet, for all that we have learned, the ocean still holds more questions than answers. We have explored less than 5% of the ocean floor in detail. The great majority of the Atlantic remains a vast, unknown territory. What else lies hidden in the deep? What new species? What new biological adaptations? What other secrets of Earth's history are locked away in the sediment of the abyssal plains? The deep sea is the largest habitat on our planet, and it is still largely a black box. Every time we send a submersible or an ROV into the abyss, we have the potential to make a discovery that could rewrite our textbooks. The age of exploration is not over. It has simply moved from the surface of the ocean to its hidden depths. The strange and the lost also continue to call to us. The mysteries of ghost ships, of strange sounds, and of submerged formations persist, not because of a lack of scientific explanation, but because they speak to our innate sense of wonder and our fascination with the unknown. They remind us that our world is not yet fully rationalized, not yet completely mapped and understood. There are still shadows on the map, places where myth and reality can coexist. These stories are a vital part of the ocean's identity, a testament to its enduring power to captivate and mystify the human spirit. Ultimately, the Atlantic is an ocean of questions. It asks us about our past, forcing us to confront the legacies of empire, trade, and conflict that have played out across its waters. It asks us about our future, challenging us to understand our impact on its delicate ecosystems and its critical role in our planet's climate. And it asks us about ourselves, about our courage to face the unknown, our capacity for wonder, and our responsibility to protect this vast, vital, and mysterious part of our world. These questions demand our attention. They call for a new kind of exploration, one that is driven not just by the desire for conquest or profit, but by a spirit of curiosity, respect, and responsibility. The Atlantic has been a mirror for humanity for centuries, reflecting our ambitions, our conflicts, and our technological prowess. Now it reflects our greatest challenge, to live in balance with the natural systems that sustain us. The answers to the ocean's questions are not just about the sea. They are about the future of our own survival on this blue planet. The silence of the deep is not empty. It is filled with the echoes of history and the promise of discovery. In the end, the Atlantic is the eternal witness. It was here before the first humans walked the earth, and it will be here long after we are gone. It has watched continents drift apart and ice ages come and go. It has seen empires rise on the promise of the wealth it could deliver and watched them crumble. Its waters have carried the hopes of millions of immigrants seeking a new life and the despair of millions more forced into bondage. It has felt the thunder of naval cannons and the silent, slow decay of their wrecks in the abyss. The ocean remembers it all. Its memory is not written in books, but in the chemistry of its water, the layers of its sediment, and the cold steel of the ships it holds in its embrace. Every crossing has left its mark. The wake of a Viking longship, the path of a Spanish galleon, the desperate zigzag of a convoy freighter. The Atlantic bears the scars of our history, the lead from Roman smelting, the mercury from industrial factories, the carbon from our fossil fuels. The ocean does not judge, it simply records. It is the most impartial historian, holding the evidence in its timeless depths for future generations or future geologists to find. To stand on its shore is to feel a connection to this immense sweep of time. The waves that break at our feet crashed against the shores of ancient Africa and Europe, tested the courage of Columbus, and carried the Titanic to its doom. We are, for a fleeting moment, part of its immense and ongoing story. The ocean teaches us a sense of scale, a sense of humility. It reminds us that our own lives, and even the history of our entire species, are but a brief chapter written by water, pressure, and time. And so, the story continues. Every day, ships cross its surface, continuing the ancient rhythm of trade and travel. Every day, the marine snow drifts down, burying the past under a new layer of the present. Every day, the great currents flow, distributing heat and life around the globe. The Atlantic remains a place of beauty, of mystery, and of power. It is a living archive, a constant presence, a force that has shaped our past and will undoubtedly shape our future. It holds our history in its silent, deep embrace. The Atlantic remembers. It remembers every crossing. The Pacific holds the world's oldest waters. But here in the Atlantic, history has a heartbeat.